Good evening, councillors, and also our council officers and members also streaming at home. We thank you for joining us online in what is once again different circumstances to last time we met. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and pay our respects to their elders past, present and also emerging, and to those from other communities who are here with us today, for they hold the memories, the tradition and the culture of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Item 3, our apologies and leave of absence, of which I don't think I have any councillors. Am I right? Thank you. CEO, declarations under the Acts, Regulations, Codes or local laws? None of those. Thank you. Declarations by councillors for any conflict of interest. Any conflict of interest? Thank you, Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Item 8.15.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Councillors? No further, thank you. The confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 20th September. Councillors, have somebody to move that they are correct. Thank you, Councillor Watson. A seconder, Councillor Bennett. Any wish to speak against? No, carried unanimously. Thank you. There are no delegates' reports this time around. Into our item 8.1, councillors, I'll just point out to the public that may be viewing and will have those table documents in front of them. The published agenda listed item 8.1 as the financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2021, and then item 8.2 as the performance report and report of the operations for the year ended the 30th of June 2021. The papers tabled for today's meeting combines both of those and a single report, the certification of annual financial report, performance statement and report of operations. Now these have been subject to feedback from the Victorian Auditor General's agent, Crow, and also initial feedback from the Victorian Auditor General. There is an officer recommendation on page 4 of the tabled reports agenda available to public and councils. Would somebody like to move a motion, councillors? Councillor Quilty, yeah, as per the Audit and Risk Committee, as per the recommendation. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You were looking at me the way, why isn't she moving yet? Thank you very much. We are looking at the financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2021 today. They were provided to the council, done and provided to the council later than normally, and that was allowed by a state government legislation. We had until, I believe, 30th of November to have a look at them, so we're looking at them in our November meeting. And the report comprises income statement, balance sheet, changes in equity, cash flow, and statement of capital works, and a number of notes. There are lots of comprehensive notes to the report. However, I would like to point out just a couple of things that jumped out at me. I'll be not very long, I promise. In the comprehensive income statement, there are a few items that are worth noting. We have received a few COVID-19 stimulus grants, which were 14,000 and a bit worth of operating grants. And sorry, I said 14,000, 14 million, and 10 million worth of capital grants, which is a big increase compared to 3 million last year. I would like to point out that they're not going to be offset in the expenses sections because a lot of them were received towards the end of the year. They couldn't be completed in this financial year up to 30th of June, and finance team will be seeking council's resolution to rebudget some of these items. Another item is developers' contributions was 7 million and a bit, which is a little bit down on last year, but they fluctuate and change every year. There is a net profit on disposal of property of 250,000. We had a question presented at the last council meeting asking about this, and there is a note 3.6 explaining this a little bit, but however, I would like to just quickly dwell on it. We had 1.8 million proceeds from sale. One of them was former sale yards, and the other one was lot 6 in Logic Boulevard. So this figure, 251,000, is a proceeds of sale less what the written down value was on the books. So we ended up with a total income of 87 million. The expense items that I would like to draw your attention to are employee costs are a little bit up, and the material and services costs are a little bit up compared to last year. And we have been provided the explanation that this increase is due to those projects related to COVID stimulus grants that were able to be started. Another very important thing that is reflected in both the income statement and the balance sheet is the revaluation of assets. A huge job was done at the end of 2021 financial year. Asset revaluation undertaken of 5 groups of assets, including buildings, land, parks, recreational assets, and playground assets. Buildings and land revaluation was carried out by independent external valuer, while parks, recreational assets, and playground assets revaluation was done by council officers. This revaluation has resulted in an increase in the net asset value, which we can see at the very bottom of the income statement, 69 million. This is largely due to increase of the value of land in regional Victoria. However, there is 15 million roughly in the middle of expenses. There is a 15 million figure which is called impairment loss on land, buildings, and land held for sale. This is not a monetary item, this is an accounting entry, and it is due to the same thing, due to the revaluation. What happened during the revaluation process, some 5.7 million worth of old and non-existent assets were identified and written off. And there was also decrease in value of some parcels of land due to rezoning. For example, 2 large lots were rezoned as grazing land, and this resulted in the decrease in value. So these are my notes for income statement. Just a couple on balance sheet. Like I said before, the big item is the revaluation of land. Sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit. I'll just start in order. In the current assets, other financial assets and cash equivalents, we have 18 million worth of cash and cash equivalents and 21.5 million worth of other financial assets, which are to be viewed together. Other financial assets had an increase on last year. That's due to the 7 million grant that's related to Barandudu Fields project. Further along, there is a line for non-current assets classified as held for sale. So there was a question about this one.
Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, sorry about that. Some lots being sold and some lots being moved to not held for sale at the moment. Revaluation of property, infrastructure and plant, and in the reserve, the very last line, we have a couple of movements. There was a movement in waste revaluation, in waste reserve and the asset revaluation reserve. So that's basically what I have time to say about the financials. And I'm sorry, performance statement is not in this item, or is it this item as well? Can I ask for leave for 1 minute to talk about performance statement? I'll just be really brief. Yeah. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. May you are looking at me, waiting for me to move. Okay, performance statement and report of operations presented several items that were performance measures on service performance, financial performance, sustainability measures. For example, there were items talking about and showing the performance for infrastructure expenses per head of municipal population, etc. I made a few notes, but because I don't have much time, I'll just draw your attention to pages 76 and 77 of the reports that were of particular interest to me because they were demonstrating the cost of having councillors. So basically, we had if I'm not mistaken, I don't have time to open this, 53,000 was $53,000 per councillor per year, which is increase on about 10 grand increase on last year, which it was explained to us due to extra election expenses. However, these expenses are in line with 2019 year, roughly the same, 53,000. So I'd like to say I hope it was worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. If it's any consolation, I think it's great value. Councillor Watson, seconder.
Mr. Mayor, I'll be very, very quick, but I'd like to highlight on Thursday we had the Risk and Audit Committee, all members, which are both external and internal. And can I say that gives, and a number of my fellow councillors were also zooming in on that meeting. And it just gives us a really great insight into what happens in our part of our budgeting and part of our whole economics of our council. And please, Narelle, if you could pass on to the whole team, like it is a fantastic result that we get, and it makes it much clearer to see how we all operate in the financial and also the risk audit area of our council. So that's also a reason why that some of the reports were late, because they had that meeting on the Thursday. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillors? No? Councillor Quilty, in closing, you've got 2 extra minutes.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to speak to the reports any longer, Mr. Mayor. However, I would like to acknowledge the effort of my fellow councillors who were able to get through the reports. As I said, the reports were provided very late. They were tabled as late items, and it took me as a qualified person, it took a few very, very late nights to get through. So I commend the finance team and I commend the councillors who diligently went through the reports for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 8.2, as discussed, was rolled into item 8.1. 8.3 is the final result and estimated rebudgets for the year ended 30th of June 2021. Page 87 of those tabled reports, there is an officer recommendation. Would somebody like to move a motion? Somebody. Page 87 of the tabled reports. Happy to move as per the recommendation. Councillor Simpfendorfer, yeah. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll just quickly almost reiterate exactly what was just said, Councillor Quilty and colleagues that were at that audit risk committee. It was certainly made a lot of sense to me with those numbers, thankfully. Just trying to look at it dry was a bit different, and I guess the efforts of the chair and everyone involved in that should be commended. As this recommendation stands, we're seeking to approve an allocation of $500,000 for a business stimulus. We all know how difficult this last 12 months has been, and I think this would be a great recommendation to get some of that surplus back into our local community for some events that can, I guess, reinvigorate Wodonga City moving forward into 2022. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Nothing really further to add to Councillor Simsdorfer, but yeah, that stimulation, and with coming up to Christmas, it might be a great opportunity to have big, bright Christmas tree and many other things for our businesses.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillors. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The sentiment of the motion, I think, is perfectly sound and perfectly good. I'd be interested to have some referral back to council on exactly how this money gets spent, because we don't say it here, so technically it probably doesn't have to come back in the way the motion's written. I agree with Councillor Watson in the sentiment of having Christmas things, but I don't think we should be spending this money on it. I think we probably already have a budgeted amount that would have been carried over or carried through in budgets year on year to deal with the Christmas items, and if we haven't, well, then we've been remiss. But the money being spent on the COVID recovery needs to be seriously targeted and seriously economically sustainable to give the best bang for the buck, so to speak. In a big picture, $500,000 isn't an awful lot of money, but we can make it go a long way if we want to target things and do this in a manner that works to stimulate business, that then stimulates economic activity, that stimulates more economic activity and gets the cycle moving, rather than just doing it on things that might be window dressing. So I'd like to put an amendment into it, but I'm prepared to accept an undertaking that there'll be a plan brought back to us for approval of the council in regards to the expenditure of this $500,000. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. If I may, I'll take that as a question to some degree and just ask the CEO to comment on that. It did come up today in today's briefing session with the councillors, which I know you were an apology, so you couldn't be there for that. But the $500,000, particularly CEO, if you'd like to give all the councillors and the community as well a bit of background on where we've arrived at that, and also the potential, hopefully, in external funds as well.
Mr Mayor and Councillor Mildren, we absolutely support those sentiments. So obviously this allocation and the budget approval for it tonight doesn't mean that council officers will go off and spend it. What it does mean is that we'll hopefully match those funds with a contribution from the state government and then come back to council with a plan as to how we intend to spend those funds. We don't want to rush to do that because we want to actually time it right and we want to get the right measures and the best bang for our buck. But all that said, what we don't want to do is not have that budget provision and therefore not be able to do this until the next budget build and everything else. So it's a timing issue, but we certainly intend to bring our plan around how to spend those funds back to council for a decision, and we're hoping that those funds will be matched by the state government. Thank you.
Thanks, CEO. Sorry, Councillor Bennett, I'm not sure if you had another question or whether I was going to Councillor Quilty, who was speaking to the motion. Councillor Quilty? Thank you. Councillor Bennett's okay, so you're right to go, Councillor Quilty.
Only couple of things I would like to say about this report, just to Councillor Mildren has mentioned 500,000. I would like to mention after the report that has been presented to us, after allowing for the total amount of 16 million, which is broken up a little bit for us, to be rebudgeted for 2021 or set aside in cash reserves. The final result for the 2021 year was a saving from the forecast budget of 2 million and a bit. So we are looking at two things. We are looking at rebudgeting the funds that we were unable to complete the related projects on, and we are looking at what to do with the unspent it's called savings in the report, but I would like to call it unspent. I define savings slightly differently. Unspent 2 million. So these are two big amounts we are looking at today. And while I recognize and acknowledge the extreme need of COVID stimulus in the community and the urgency for us to make the decision on what to do, I would also like to say that I personally would like to have the opportunity to look a little bit more at the well, firstly, I would like to look a bit more at the budgeted versus actual variances, even if it is at a high level, and to have a bit more time and opportunity to spend to look at the what we're going to direct the budgeted funds to. Therefore, and I did think about putting up a motion today, but I just decided that I won't be supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Hall or Bennett? No, for Bennett. Councillor Hall, do you want to speak to the motion? Or?
That Councillor Quilty's made a good point there, and yeah, I'll probably support that view. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Simpfendorfer, in closing. Nothing further. I'll therefore put the motion. Councillors, all in favour? All opposed? Thank you. Carried 5-2. Item 8.4. Councillors, if you feel like you've seen this document a couple of times, you probably have. The Financial Plan 2021 to 2022 and 2030 to 2031, the 10-year financial plan. Page 107 of your tabled reports. Would somebody like to move a motion? Councillor Watson, as per the recommendation. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I suppose one area of council I'm not the strongest in is the financial side, but I know what's right and what's wrong. But what's before us, I think, is a good financial plan to take us forward, and hopefully it's adopted tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Simpfendorfer. Reserve your right. Okay, thank you. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I spoke at length to the financial plan last time. I won't be repeating myself. I just would like to point out that this plan, high-level 10-year plan, was made with the assumption of rate increase. Over the 10 years, 1.5% over the first 5 years, and then gradually creeping up to 2%. I believe that we should work on trying to, if not decrease the rates in the near future, then work towards having a very reasonable reasonable decreases or very reasonable, very small raises in the rates if we can't afford zero increase in rates. And I believe this should be reflected in all our strategic documents. Therefore, I'm not going to support the financial plan today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Bennett.
Just a few things in here. This doesn't include any grant funding that we haven't yet got. That doesn't mean we won't be applying for as much as we can. For borrowings, it actually does have a provision in here for 4 million, and that will be around if we purchase the depot. So that decision again will come back to councillors to decide. With the few, just to on Councillor Quilty's point about the rates, with the in here it has future rate assumption that the budget proposes to accept the rate for 1.5 and no rate cap variations. So in terms of the 2%, can I just get some commentary on that one?
So over the 10 years, by year 10, we've got a 2% CPI factor as the rate rise in year 10. Obviously, we've taken a very conservative approach, given that certainly when we were dealing with our VAGO for our financial statements, they were suggesting we should be looking at a CPI uplift of 3% with some of the indicators that we were using in our financial statements. So this is a pretty conservative estimate. It tends to run a little bit below what the average CPI has been over the last sort of 5 years or more. So I guess that builds in that ability for us to have a lower rate rise should the rate cap be above that amount.
Okay, cool, thank you. It's interesting to note that VAGO, Victorian Auditor General's Office, has suggested 3, but we're sticking with 2. That's all for me.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Consistently, I believe Wodonga Council is a high rating council, and I think there's been enough information out there to sustain that as a point of view for some time. I think we should be trying to find our way back down the ladder, so to speak, a little bit in terms of where we sit across the averages of the state of Victoria in terms of rates applied. Our actual rates that we charge could potentially come back a bit, and we need to cut our cloth to suit that. That doesn't mean that the actual dollar amounts need to come back. It just means that over the distance of this plan, we may, or we should be, in my opinion, particularly in the early years, trying, while interest rates and inflation is low, we should be trying to claw back what we can to get ourselves back down the rates table a bit, where we are not seen as being a high rating council. To do that, we should be looking at, I believe in the 10-year plan, we should be looking to have as close to zero as is practically possible in the first couple of years, and then treat the remaining years based on their merit as to how it unfolds and what the economic circumstances of the time create. It may well be that we have an inflation rate much, much higher than we have now, and just keeping pace in 6 or 7 years' time might be rates considerably higher. But I think we should be, in our forward planning right now, in the early years, we should be trying to bring our rates back down in real terms, not in necessarily in monetary terms, but in real terms, we should be trying to bring it back. So I think we're missing opportunities. We're on the end of a budget, or on the end of a economic cycle. We've got a whole range of extraneous activities that have caused different changes in the way our economy is functioning, and I think we're missing an opportunity to bring ourselves back down the table and become back in the mid ranks of rating amounts. So I've consistently not supported these sorts of things, and including budgets. So I'm not going to support this plan either. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Question, Councillor Bennett.
Just a clarifying question on Councillor Mildren's points. I did read somewhere in this report, it's so long I can't find it, in terms of where we are ranking, and I know the comment was made to have a fair comparison, let's look at the other regional cities, and that we were about in the middle of that. Is that correct? I've read that correctly, that we're in about the middle?
Yeah, we're in 5th place of 9 regional city councils, so it's smack bang in the middle.
Councillor Hall.
I might not be total agreement. It depends on how you calculate the whether you include the other waste charges and what have you in it. Then it could be a bit of a variance to. Was it include? Okay. Okay. Over the years I've been on council, we've done a 10-year plan. Many councils haven't, and I think it's become a requirement that the state government has legislated for councils to have a 10-year plan going forward. Look, I haven't been a support. I'm not going to support this financial plan I didn't support the 1.5 increase in the budget this year because of COVID. If you look around, there's many empty shops. People are losing jobs, and it's hard. It's been a hard year, and I think more than ever, that's when we should have probably as Councillor Mildren said, cut the cloth and supported our ratepayers in that budget. But going forward, it's very difficult to plan 10 years out. In some ways, I don't understand why we really do it, because every year we reassess the budget annually and we go through the financials and make decisions on where that money is to be spent, or what rate rise we anticipate. But we need that plan going forward. So, it's a sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. So we can support the financial plan going forward, but there could be so many different challenges and income variances going forward that it might not mean anything in the end. So you probably need a crystal ball to be able to work out where we'll actually land. But I'm with the view with Councillor Mildren that I still believe when our rates are high. I've done reassessments over the years, and I still find that they're in one of the highest in, like you might say we're 50 in a similar regional area council, but we're still high in the scheme of things across other councils. So, and that's one of the issues community members come up to me about is our council rate. So I think we can do a better assessment of the financial plan going forward. I think it would be great if we, as councils, had more input into that. It was something that comes across to us, we either support it or we don't. And I think it would be great if we had more input into how that was planned and what figures we use going forward. So having said that, I won't be supporting that the item tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Simpfendorf, you reserved your right.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to highlight too, before I go to a particular question, that in the report it highlights 3 informal submissions were received, and that is for viewing for those that want to duck into it and have a look. But it was important that those are at least responded to, even though they weren't formal, so it was pleasing to see. The issue of rates comes up, and like Councillor Hall said, we're constantly asked as councillors throughout the community, and the same narrative seems to be as they're so high. But when we scratch a bit further, and I challenge those people that ask me why they're so high to do their own research, not take the word of someone next to them. My direct question is, who compiles a list that has put us 5th out of 9th? Who does that come from?
So every year I go on to every council's website and I obtain the rates and the waste charges for every single council at draft budget time and compile a list of all of those councils and compare Wodonga Council as to where we sit. I've subsequently found out I'm not the only one who does that. A colleague from another council has done that, but not with the waste charges included, and have got very similar results, almost identical, I would say. So that allows me to see where we sit, and also gives me the opportunity to respond to queries, because we do get those queries, and I acknowledge we do have fairly high rates, but in comparison to the level of services that we're providing, when you compare like councils to like councils, it really is in that regional cities group where you're providing a breadth of services to a broader regional area. It's very difficult to compare to metro councils or smaller rurals, because they have a very different budget and a very different council plan requirement that they're funding with their budgets.
Thank you. That was probably one that keeps coming up, because rates keeps coming up all the time. But I do actually highlight the fact that's been said, and I think one of Councillor Hall said about having more input. I'm satisfied with the input we've been able to put in to this. I know it's hard to have a crystal ball over for a 10-year plan. That's a lot of common sense in there. However, the input that we have to the budgets has been quite a bit of talk around it as to the opportunity, but I'm satisfied with the opportunity I've been given as a first-time councillor to understand and contribute to it. So I'll be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorf. Did you have a question, Councillor Quilty?
Mr. Mayor, I know that I've already used my chance to speak. May I make a small side note regarding the submissions, if that's all right? Thank you very much, and sorry for stuffing up the procedure a little bit. Councillor Simpendorfer has mentioned the informal submissions. I would like to point out that it's really great to receive submissions, and it's really good to have informal submissions in the report. What the submissions say to me, amongst apart from the actual comments on the financial plan, is community are happy and willing to participate. There are comments on a lack of transparency, lack of community engagement. I think there is a little bit of difficulty in the community in terms of how to participate, where to find the information, how to make formal submissions. And I think us as councillors and as officers should definitely address that and help our community, because in my opinion, community participation is still lower than I would like to see it. And I think we should make every effort to help community participate meaningfully. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Watson, in closing.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it is a 10-year projection, and I think we were ahead of the game on a lot of councils. But we also review it each year when we do our annual budget. And I suppose one example that we kept on changing the dates on was probably Barranderta Fields, and a lot of our projected budgets and things are on projected projects, and so we'll change them as time goes by. So I concur with Councillor Simpendorfer that you know, we have a very good audit and risk team, and we have a very good team that run our financials, and I commend the report to tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I therefore put the motion, councillors. All those in favour? All opposed? Carried 4-3. Thank you very much. Item 8.5, the risk management policy. There is a recommendation on page 12 of your agenda. You'll just need to flick back on your tablets there, councillors, just to be back in the right document. Somebody like to move a motion? As per the recommendation, Councillor Simpendorfer, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Simpendorfer.
I read through this, Mr. Mayor, and I've got a bit of a typo on my notes here. I think I meant to say the word depth, not death, but the level of depth considered, it's only updates and administrative from what it seems to fall in line with some recent acts. So I'll support as per the recommendation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Simpendorfer. Councillor Watson.
As per the recommendation, no comment.
Thank you, councillors. No, anything in closing, Councillor Simpendorfer? Depth, not death. Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 8.6 is the Municipal Association of Victoria WorkCare scheme. A substantial report there. Recommendation on page 16 of the agenda. Councillors, does somebody like to move a motion? Councillor Simpendorfer, as per recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpendorfer.
I think this has come up to us before in some briefings, and we've been aware that there's this scheme winding up for some time, and where that money was going to come from. We're in a very lucky situation that's been forecast enough that it hasn't seen us surprised by this amount and what's happened with the scheme. So credit to those that could foresee it. So I'll be recommending it as per the recommendation on 16. I think I've got it on 16. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Simpendorfer. Councillor Bennett, reserving right or just nothing? Okay, thank you, councillors. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a few things that I think need to be noted. The first thing is the $549,200 that we're paying as a consequence of the current call may not be the total amount, because there is something in the order of $74 million over the whole scheme of the number of councils that are funded under the, or are covered under this scheme through the MAV, and that 74 million has been set out by the WorkSafe authority, and some of the impositions that they are imposing, and I won't go into detail because I'll be taking longer than Councillor Quilty did before, but some of the impositions that have been placed in relation to this by WorkSafe, in my opinion, are, I'm tempted to say unfair, but I'm certainly going to say onerous. And given that the scheme was adequately funding the WorkSafe requirements of the member councils for a number of years, I think 3 or 4 or 5 years, at a considerably lower cost and lower contributions requirement than what will be the case and what is now being transferred into the current scheme, because we have to cover everything up till 2027, even though we can't take premiums from the members of the organisation. So this is a complex matter. It's not necessarily only going to be the 549,200. It could be any other amount. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Any other amount that might be called to meet the requirements of claims against the WorkSafe insurance through until 2027. And the estimate, as I said, is about $74 million across, I think it's 31 councils from memory. So it's feasible that we could be called upon again to make another contribution to this. I think the scheme that we had was quite a good scheme, and I don't understand why the state government is permitting WorkSafe or directing, whichever the case may be, WorkSafe to take this line to cease licensing MAV as a self-insurer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Did I see Councillor Quilty, your hand go up a moment ago? Yes?
Mr. Mayor, I was going to ask for comments on why the installment was initial in the recommendation, and whether we could whether we should expect more and how much. I was going to ask for predictions, but Councillor Mildren has already preempted and spoken to it. So just wondering if anybody has anything to add or to disprove.
Happy to take that as a question, Councillor Quilty, and sort of, yeah, take, I guess, what Councillor Mildren has sort of said. I know both the CEO and Director Klein have been working feverishly to try to predict what was going to happen with this for some months. Thank you, Director.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on page 19 of the reports in the financial viability section, I do refer to the estimate of the full liability to the 2027. So there was an extra $56,900 is the estimate of the additional charges over that 6-year period. But as Councillor Mildren did allude to, it's based on an estimate of the claims liabilities as they stand at the moment for the term of that claim. So if those claims liabilities, as they unfold over the next few years, if they come in and they're higher than what they were originally estimated, then we could have to pay some additional money across for that higher claim. If they come in under the estimated claim, likewise, we could end up with a refund of some of what we've already contributed. Now, the initial estimates are quite high from WorkSafe, but there is that risk. But the additional amount to cover the costs of managing the ceased scheme to 2027 at this stage is an extra $56,900 over that 6-year period.
Thank you, and I think that would have adequately answered the question. Councillors Hall or Watson, anything to speak to on this one? No. Councillor Simpfendorf, nothing in closing. I'll therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thanks, councillors. 8.7 is the closed circuit television policy. There's a recommendation from the officers on page 21 of the agenda. Would somebody like to move a motion? It's Councillor Simpfendorfer as per recommendation. Councillor Bennett as the seconder. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Yeah, as per the recommendation, Mr Mayor, I do want to highlight too that there's some great feedback from the groups that did contribute and concur with them about, if they want to be part of any future trials moving forward. It's probably a good way or good input from our community that wants to be part of any trials that want to have to protect assets and or community confidence. And I noticed some of the comments, and I can certainly say there is strong evidence to suggest that CCTV in places of public gatherings can reduce crime. So if those parts of our community want to be part of any of those trials, I'd encourage them to make contact with council. But it's a solid policy. It's fair. It fits in line with all the acts, and I guess people's privacy is certainly well protected by a number of acts that regulate and govern this type of policy. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett.
So this came up to council a little while ago and we put it out for feedback, and we did get some really good feedback, particularly from sporting clubs, talking about their need to be able to potentially have CCTV in their, around their clubs, because obviously lots of these people are volunteers. Things happen during the night and volunteers then have to go out. So it would be really helpful for sporting clubs. So that's great that the sporting clubs got in contact with us and we've altered the policy. Another point, I just wanted to make some clarification. So the CCTV that we're talking about in here is different to the CCTV, say, in Albury, in Dean Street. So that is monitored and that is, everywhere. Whereas this is purely about council assets and to deter instances of crime around that. So this is not, this isn't the kind of CCTV that Albury Council are doing. It's different to that.
That's a question, or do I need to get confirmation from the head nods, or you're comfortable? Yeah, you've interpreted correct. Thanks, Councillor Bennett. Councillors? Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't have the same level of confidence as Councillor Bennett in that what we're doing is something different to Albury, because the policy explicitly provides that the type, the location and type of systems to be used is a decision of the CEO or a delegate who the CEO might delegate to. And that's explicitly provided under clause 4.1 of the policy. So it is feasible that the CEO or his or her delegate may say that that a particular CCTV form similar to Albury or some other form might be appropriate in a particular location. So I don't have the same level of certainty about what might unfold. Going back from that though, I support the principle that we need to have a policy in relation to closed circuit TV, and I support the fact that there are lots and lots of places and activities and things where it would be very appropriate for council to be having CCTV for the protection of assets and a whole range of other things. I am concerned with clause 4.1 where this type and location of the facility is not a decision of the council. And that's explicitly written into the policy. So I'm leaning towards not voting in favour of this on that basis. If others have a view that they would like to change that, then I'm happy to hear that. But at this stage, I'm not going to support the policy on that basis. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Question, Councillor Bennett.
So if we were to have the same type of CCTV in Albury, so that is constantly monitored, that if we were to do that, that would come back up to council, wouldn't it?
Councillor Bennett raises a good question. CEO.
So I just go back to the fact that the current policy is dated 2014, so it's way out of date. This new policy is timely. It's entirely focused at protecting council assets. I won't specify what particular piece of equipment goes into those assets. I'll let the technical experts do that. but it is used for asset protection only, and it's not monitored the whole time. So, as is the case with our existing CCTV systems, it's recording the whole time, as we are being right now, but the release of any information would only happen after a crime. The police would request for that piece of video footage to be released by me as the CEO, and it's released to them and to them only. So I think we've got some very tight controls in place, and the technical specifications of the equipment we'd leave to the experts. Thank you.
Did that answer your question, Councillor Bennett? Thank you. Councillors Hall, Quilty or Watson? Councillor Hall, thank you.
I didn't support this last time it came to council. It's not that I'm not against protecting our assets, but I believe it's something that should come back to councillors and not be delegated, because I have concerns over where they will go. I think it should be a decision of the council, and I think Councillor Ron Mildren makes some good, valid points.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last time we voted on it, I supported the recommendation. I remember asking whether the system was going to record the sound, and was assured that it was not going to be. So I was reassured there. However, and I actually was going to support it because I think it's very important to protect council assets, public assets, against vandalism and anything that might happen. However, the councillors who spoke before me make a valid point. The location and type of CCTV systems should come for council approval. So I think I've, for fear of being, despite of the fear of being inconsistent with my previous vote, I do have a bit of a concern, and I won't be supporting this policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Watson, before I get Simpfendorfer to close.
Probably very and briefly and very quickly for you, Mr. Mayor, is that it's trying to get back any damage to our assets in our community, and maybe if some of our community members might have been injured or volatiled in the sense of some drunkenness or whatever occurs, for the CVT picks it up. But in the days when I rang Hungry Jack's, and I think most businesses you go into, they have CVT going and videoing nearly every business you go into that you don't even know about. So I think we need to keep up with the times. I think the policy's been so old, and it's great it's been brought up to date. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Simpfendorfer in closing? No. Therefore, put the motion, councillors. All those in favour? All those against? Carried 4-3. Item 8.8 is the CEO Employment and Remuneration Policy. As we know, councillors, this is a requirement of the Act that sort of pushed this one in. Page 26 of the agenda. Would somebody like to move a motion? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bennett. Councillor Watson.
Mr. Mayor, I think it's very self-explanatory. It's something we have to do, the recommendations there before us and the policy. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Bennett.
I'll reserve my right.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillors. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is very important to have this policy. There is one thing that I am concerned about. The committee overseeing the CEO employment and remuneration is going to include an independent member. According to the policy, the independent member is going to be selected via expression of interest for 4 years, with the opportunity to be re-engaged for another 4 years, so opportunity for 8 years in total. It is a bit of a concern to me that our decisions will be inherited by the next council. I don't think we should lock ourselves in like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillors, Councillor Mildren.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion. I'd like to amend or include that the CEO employment and remuneration policy included with the attachments be approved, except that the duration of the committee be to the end of the current council term, and that applies to all members of the committee, including the independent member.
Councillor Bennett has a question.
That particular time frame, is that something that the Act specifies or we have put in there?
So the Act doesn't specify a time frame to the best of my knowledge, but the intent behind the Act, and it's important to, I think, point this out, is to add an independent member who has HR expertise and experience in actually managing and performance managing a CEO, which, you know, to be frank, not many councillors have that experience. They've never run a large organisation or been a CEO. So the intent is very sound, and what we need to do is we need to attract talent as that independent member. So what we've spoken to... can I just finish, please? What we've done is we've...
We'll let the CEO finish. Councillor Mildren, what's your point of order?
Mr. Mayor, I believe the CEO is entering into the debate.
I believe he's answering a question, Councillor Mildren.
I'm just trying to ascertain why we've gone with the tenure we've gone for. What we've done is we've sought out trying to do this as a collaborative arrangement with all our surrounding shires so we can attract some real talent. The person, the independent member, is likely to come from Melbourne or Sydney to do this role, and by sharing the role with our surrounding councils, not only do we get value for money, but we also get that talent at the right sort of level and are more likely to attract somebody in. And the tenure is there to help attract, but continuity is really important in this role, because as councillors do come and go and change, that independent member can be the continuity link and help with the new councillors to actually advise what's gone on with the CEO's performance review over previous years. It's answering the question. Thank you, Councillor Mildren.
Councillor Mildren's motion or amendment is there. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hall. Councillor Mildren, speak too.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The fact of the matter remains that under the Act, the committee dissolves when the council dissolves for the election anyway. You cannot have a committee of the council that is inclusive of councillors carrying over. It's got to be reconstituted at the start of the next council anyway. So fundamentally, my view is the incoming council, irrespective, should have the authority and the ability to make their own decisions about who sits on their own committees and to make their own call about all of these things, irrespective of what it is. It's not a matter of you know, how efficient it is or what the decision-making is or whether it works in with other councils. That's all well and good, and it's terrific to have those sorts of things where they're achievable and available. And given that we have 4-year terms and the dates of every council election is on the same date, these things could still work in perfectly well. But my view is, and the reason I've moved the amendment to the motion is because the committee dissolves at the end of the council when the council concludes on the day of the election of the next council. So for those two reasons, I don't think we should be carrying a position that takes us across into the next council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hall, second.
Am I speaking to the... Yep. Yep. Look, I wrote here, I totally agree with what Councillor Mildren has put up, but also too, the CEO mentioned the possibility of using a consultant collectively with other councils in the suggested documents. Is in my view, I believe it should be done independently. I think that the CEO's appointment is something of more a personal nature with the councillors. To have a collective consultant just for the sake of the monetary side of things, or whether there's, is there consistency? I don't believe we have to have that across other councils. It's our decision. It should be done independently. And that's one area of the policy I don't agree with. I think if we don't have it independently, it could, there's always a possibility of creeping corruption involved in it. So, yeah, I don't support that. But I support the amendment to have it over the council term, not going further than our council term.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillors, for or against the amendment? No, sorry, no, to speak for or against. Is anyone wishing to add? Thanks, Councillor Watson first. I'll come back to you, Councillor Bennett.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I think when a new council term is elected, such as ours last year, we have a lot on our agenda and a lot to take in and learn, and I think we need continuity of policy running over terms, and depending on when it's reviewed or renewed, it might be at the end of that council term, but I think it's definitely needs to have continuity going into a new council term, and I will be voting against this amendment.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Bennett, I promise to come back to you.
Thanks. After that explanation, I'm happy with the 4-year term. If the new council really, for some reason, hate who we've got on board, they can, within a year, they can find their own independent member. So I'm happy that it, like Councillor Watson said, it has some continuity, but then if the new council really isn't happy with it, they can make a change.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Sorry, the governance officer and myself are just working through a technicality of some wording. Councillor Mildren, just refresh my memory what you said with your wording on that motion, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. That's a good one. It was done off the top of the head, so we might have to go back to the tape for the exact wording. But that the CEO employment and remuneration policy, included with the attachment, be approved, except that the policy be changed, that the term of the appointment of the independent member and the align with the committee and dissolve when the council dissolves. Or you might have to go back to the tape to get the exact words, but principally, the committee only exists until the council doesn't exist. And in my understanding of the Act, we can't have one member of a committee stand when all the rest of the committee's been dissolved.
I've got a fair bit of activity happening here, Councillor Bennett.
So with Councillor Mildren's point about if the committee dissolves, can the independent member still continue on? I understand that it'll be potentially different council laws, but are there other committees where the independent members do carry on?
So the independent member can absolutely carry on, and that's the point, is that the independent member carries on. So if all the councillors were to leave and we had 7 new councillors, that independent member could guide them, give them the history, give them the context of previous performance in the prior year. So that member could stand. The committee wouldn't meet until the new councillors had been elected and the committee would reform. But the expert member, the expert independent member, that tenure could proceed and provide that continuity link. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying, CEO. Councillor Bennett, happy with the answer. Councillor Sinfendorf, your hand went up.
Just to clarify, and I think it's a question, it's probably my understanding of what was mentioned before. So the intent of this paper involving the other councils is so that when whoever the independent is chosen, getting the best experienced HR person is so that that person is employed by other councils, but not actually being involved in the decision making for another council. As in, we're not being involved in, for argument's sake, Inigo Shire's appointment. It's the independent that we want to attract that may be sitting across 4 councils and being paid by different councils for that role. Is that correct? I was a bit confused about some of the comments that went around there. Maybe I've confused you more, but that was my understanding.
Yes, that's correct. And I guess the continuity link is important, but as always, we try and save money and do things as efficiently as possible. And sometimes attracting talent, if you do it in a shared service type of arrangement, there will be separate arrangements for each council, independent to each council. But there's a likelihood you'll get a lower price across 4 councils doing the same thing and attracting that talent in. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Quilty, the only person who hasn't spoken yet. Before I go to Councillor Milton to close on his amendment, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, I appreciate the how much new council, as a new councillor, how much new councillors have on their plate when they just start and how much fog their head might be in. However, I believe for the sake of preserving the independence of the independent member and preserving the councillors' right and opportunity to start fresh and make their own decision, and also from the sheer logic of the whole committee coming to an end other than one member, I think the suggestion to start over at the start of the new council term, it sounds good to me. I think it's a great one. Besides, as far as I remember, we as a new council had a few months before we had to do a CEO review. And by then the fog has settled a little bit, and we were able to fill out the questionnaires and make our decisions and have a fully informed meeting about it. So as hard as it may be, I'm sure the next council will be up for it and possibly willing to make their own call. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Mildren, in closing, your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This committee is a committee of the council, and my understanding, contrary to what we've been told, my understanding is committees of the council cannot carry from one council to the next. It ceases to exist when the council ceases to exist. It may well be that some or all of the councillors that sit around the room today get re-elected at the next election and carry on, and everything gets passed and put through the system and everything's exactly the same, or it might be something entirely different. It might be 7 new councillors, who knows? That's not the point. The point of the matter is, my understanding, even under the new Local Government Act, my understanding is it is a committee of that council, and that council lasts for 4 years, and then you have another council, as in the elected council. I'm not talking about the council as the corporate entity, I'm talking about the elected council. This is a committee of the elected council, and we are dissolved on the day of the election. I think it's 6 a.m. I'm not sure about that. But so in effect, all the committees get dissolved. So carrying over on a committee of the council, I don't believe is possible. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and I'm not asking for the further debate, I've made the point. The second thing is, how dare we have the right to say, oh, we're going to impose our will onto a new council that might have completely different views of the world to what we have, in whichever way. And by making people appointed that carry over, whether it be for 1 year or 2 years or potentially half the term or more than half the term of the next council, I just think that's pretentious on our part. We shouldn't be assuming the role of the next council by dictating things and placing things in place to that effect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
councillors, I know there's been a fair bit of discussion and debate there, but we're all clear on what that motion was for the amendment. So happy for me to put it? Yep, okay. Purpose of intent, all those in favour? All those opposed? Thank you. So we're back at the original motion. I'm looking at, well, we've heard from Councillor Hall and Councillor Simpfendorfer during that amendment. I'll turn to you to ask if I should go to Councillor Bennett, who reserved a right to speak. Councillor Bennett.
I feel like there's been enough speaking, but so with, say, the independent members on the audit committee, so they continue on past the current council, and if we just had none of them, you know, that would be extremely difficult for a new council to come in. So that's why I'm really happy with the current motion to have the 4-year term in there, because I can't imagine a new council coming in, you know, say on the audit committee, not having any of that knowledge. So I'm completely in favour of the recommendation in front of us.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. In closing, Councillor Watson. Oh, sorry. Councillor Watson in closing.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I would like to put the motion, but as Councillor Bennett and we've all discussed, is that there are so many things that during our council term rolls over. If we're going to go down the line that Councillor Mildren was saying, is that their 10-year budget, which we've just been talking about, would be thrown out and we'd start a new 10-year budget. So I think we need to just put the motion, put it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I'll therefore put the motion as per the recommendation. All those in favour? All those opposed? Carried 4-3. Thank you, councillors. Item 8.9, the Place Names Advisory Committee appointments. Officer recommendation on page 29. I'm going to turn to you, Councillor Hall, knowing that you're the current chair. Would you like to move as per the recommendation?
I will. Okay, I'm going to support this motion, but as chair, I'll just give you a little bit of my thoughts behind it. As the P&C chair, I was included in the interview process to interview the applicants for the appointment of the new committee members. All applicants interviewed were good candidates, and it would be hard to choose between them if it came to that. Having said that, I do have concern over the amount of committee members. If the recommendation is adopted, there will be 9 committee members. That is including the interviewed applicants in this report. In addition, there will be 3 staff members assisting committee members as well. This will amount to a committee members that we have more than councillors here in the meeting. So I find myself asking, is this really necessary to have that many members? I personally think it's not. And especially now that the newly added cost of $100 per committee member per meeting. If we were to go just on the standard 4 meetings per year, that's $800 per meeting, $3,200 over the 4 meetings, or $4,800 over 6 meetings. So I'm very mindful of council spending, and especially when I don't believe it's necessary. I feel we could still achieve good outcomes with a smaller group of members. But having said that, I will support what's the recommendation going up, but I'm just speaking of my concerns around the policy that we adopted at the last at the last council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm really impressed with the candidates that came forward and have been successful, if the motion is successful tonight. I believe that having that variation, or that great degree of across-the-board intelligence coming in and knowledge of our city and our past and our present is fantastic. And I also think that not every meeting has a full attendance, so those who are not attending, I'm sure, would not be paid. I think it's a great step forward for our place names and what we're going to be doing in our city for future.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Bennett, are you happy to second? So speak.
I think it is so exciting that people actually want to join a council committee, to have that many people, and they all, are bringing their own different skill sets. It's fantastic when you have a committee around you that has lots of knowledge that you don't have. I also am completely supportive of the $100 payment if people need it. This is designed to ensure that, a young parent who needs to put their child in childcare can afford to do that. And for some people, that will be, can I attend this meeting or not? And, our council committees should be diverse and make sure they're not just the same old people. So we have to put things in place that ensures that we have diversity. And I think this committee is like one of the best examples of diversity.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillors speaking for or against? Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Probably just to highlight exactly what's been said, but when I read through this, I was very impressed with the level of variety, professional and personal experience of those that applied. And look, I do take on Councillor Hall's comments around it could be problematic having so many, but I tend to lean towards, on this instance, that we need to embrace those that want to put their hand up in these times and go on a committee for us and accept them. So I'll support it as is, but I do take on board Councillor Hall's comments. A really good mix of, as I said, experience, professionalism, history around town that is exactly what we need on that committee.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors, in particular, councillors Hall and Bennett, who have done a lot of work and have had a lot of involvement with the committee. I've had none. I was just very impressed reading through the applications. However, I would like to say that when any organization advertises for a job, there's usually one job and lots of really good candidates. Sometimes we need to take a pick. And while I understand the sentiment of helping people attend the meeting through providing this little $100 stimulus, we as council don't have the money. We are guardians of the money that our ratepayers give us, and we don't have much to throw around. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Hall, perhaps in closing? If you're right, Councillor Milton, yeah. Councillor Hall in closing?
Yeah, look, just a little bit to add to that, many people in the community put their hands up for committees that don't necessarily have any monetary involvement. If we were to have that, the only reason why people put their hand up, it would be rather disappointing. It would be very costly for council. It would be rather disappointing. It's much the same as having volunteers. If we paid all our volunteers for the work that they volunteer, we wouldn't be able to employ them all or to pay for them all. So whilst it's a nice thought, I think we would still get committee members without the monetary incentive.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillors, I'll put the motion as per the recommendation. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. Item 8.10, the Sport and Recreation Funding, World Game Facilities Fund 2021-2022. Allocate some budget funds is the report purpose and the recommendation on page 34. Would somebody like to move a motion? Councillor Simpfendorfer, as per recommendation. Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Watson. Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Yeah, it's great to see we're going to revisit this grant application that we've applied 2 previous years and have gone without, but the lights down there on the fields are in drastic need of an update. So if we can do that with some World Game Facilities funding, that would be great. The council contribution of about 80,000 is the breakup. From the way I understood it was 300,000 total cost, 200,000 from the application and a little bit from the club down there, hopefully a bit more if we can. But I think it's important to assist in that lighting to not only attract, it's not just for soccer that potentially could have its use, it's any rectangle game that could be used down there and attract those events that we've failed to do so over the last few years. So I think it's great to see that we try and lift the lighting system down there to attract some more sport, particularly the rectangle kind in town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Watson?
Not much to add, but rectangular sport, I'd imagine rugby would come under that, Mr. Councillor Simpfendorfer, and a game that you really enjoy and aspire to. So, Mr. Mayor, no further comment.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Mildren?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concede that there are benefits to the club and to La Trobe University in having their lights upgraded, and that the facilities probably not at a great standard as a direct consequence of it. But for council to put $80,000 to an asset that is not owned by the council, it's not an asset that the council is likely to ever own, or at least it would appear that it's not likely to ever own it. It's owned by a university, or as I understand, that's the university owns the land and owns the site. And I just find it, I think there's more council-owned facilities in our community that would benefit from the $80,000, and more community groups that are occupying council-owned facilities that would absolutely love to have $80,000 to contribute to projects. And that leaves me in a very difficult position, because I understand why this is needed, and I understand that it would be of great benefit to that club and to the La Trobe University, and potentially to other organisations that, as Councillor Simpendorfer said, use rectangular fields. But because it's not a council asset, I'm a bit reluctant to be suggesting that we should be putting money towards it. I would be absolutely happy to give, local government support to a grant application that was being supported by funding from either La Trobe University and or the club, or a combination of both, to get up to their $1 for whatever dollar or $1 for $2 that the World Game Fund provides. But I find it really difficult when I know that there's so many other clubs and organisations that use council facilities that would love to have an $80,000 contribution to upgrading their facilities. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Hall?
Look, yes, I'm total agreeing with Councillor Mildren. Also, just a question: is the university providing any monetary contribution? Would you be aware of that one? Oh.
Turn your mic off, Olivia.
Yeah, the university isn't supplying any funding. The funding is as per the table on page 36. So we are getting a substantial grant, hopefully, and that's contingent on us going ahead, of course, of $200,000 from Sport and Rec Victoria. The user contribution from the club, 20,000, and a contribution from council, 80,000. The reason why the university aren't really chipping in is because whilst they own the land, this is a community facility. And the whole aim of this is to activate and attract more people to use that facility. It's already well used. I think there's about 500 club members. But by putting that lighting in, it can be used for a variety of games at a different standard. And we think, again, post-COVID, having those sorts of facilities gives us a greater chance of attracting more people in to use them. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, Councillor Hall, another question?
Does the club pay any rent or lease arrangements to the university?
Sorry, Director Hogg, Director of Community Development.
So it is through an affordable licensing agreement. I think it's worth noting that with this grant does provide a significant sort of relief and a home to diamonds. The proposal is actually supporting the lighting system, which would see us actually operate at the recommended level for standard games, standard matches, and also for practice levels. At the moment, we operate with a 50 lux, and some of the other parts are actually below 50. This is actually proposing that we at least operate at a minimum of 100 lux, which is in line with requirements.
Yeah, just for clarification, do they pay any leasing arrangements with the university?
Sorry, the arrangements is directly with council, and then we have a licence in place. We have a licence in place for the club, seasonal licence in place. So council are the leasee.
Question from Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If we don't own the land, how do we become the licensee for the land? That's something I didn't detect in the report, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Director Hogg. That'd be great.
So council undertakes the lease, and we issue a seasonal licence, which is an agreement, a sub-agreement in place with the clubs.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I don't think that answered the question. If La Trobe University own the land, how do we get the right to undertake a lease, or if you want a sublease, to the football club, to the Diamonds? How do we become, how do we have a right to lease the land if we aren't the owners of the land?
Yep, so we are the leasee, and through being the leasee, we issue a seasonal licence, of which by the club can use it.
Do we have any monetary costs involved with that?
Sorry. As with all of the grounds maintained across the council area that we provide for sporting facilities, we do contribute to the maintenance of those grounds, absolutely.
Every time I look for this damn button, someone else has got the priority. CEO, I think there's some clarity required there around how the council is the leasee. If you could have a go at answering that one, and I guess it might be on notice, but the costs associated to that. But I'm guessing this is a long-term agreement.
So we might come back, we might take it on notice, but my understanding is that we don't pay a fee to La Trobe University. La Trobe University acknowledged this is a community facility, and by arranging a no-fee lease with the council then takes on a maintenance responsibility to allow for community use of that site.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Hall, you got another question?
So, so if we're the leasee, well, I'm getting confused, but so the club pay us a contribution for their lease of the land or their usage of the land? Is that seasonal licence? And they pay us a nominated fee for that?
All right, everyone got that? We're on top of it. Councillor Mildred.
Thanks for your indulgence. Given the information that we've just learnt, on the assumption that the lease is a long lease that we have there, well, that can certainly change my opinion on things, because if council is occupying the land on behalf of the community through a lease with La Trobe University, and it's shall we say, tantamount to us having ownership of the facility, then that changes the way I see it entirely. I find that interesting that we've managed to draw this out in the middle of a council meeting. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildred, and I have no doubt it may be something that's a layover of another councillor term some years ago in terms of how that space provided the community. And Director Hogg, I'm certain you could probably correct me, but I know we've had shortages of sporting fields as a city for a very long time that have been addressed in multiple different ways to get our community groups engaged in sport. I draw our attention back to the motion in front of us. Councillor Bennett and Councillor Quilty hadn't spoken, but if you're happy, I'll go to Councillor Simpfendorfer in closing. Thank you.
Just in closing, Mr Mayor, look, I agree. We're a little way off from the Barrandetta Fields going through to completion, and bearing in mind, I think the Women's World Cup soccer is in 2023, so this hopefully will put us in good stead to make any sort of application to host any of those events and encourage our kids through soccer, but other sports. And that's why I think, just to clarify too, Mr Mayor, is if the grant is not successful, the $80,000 still doesn't go towards that piece. That's correct, isn't it? Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Simpfendorfer. I'll therefore put the motion. All those in favour? All right, carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 8.11, the Murray Arts update and MOU. There is a recommendation on page 39 of the agenda, councillors. Somebody, thank you, Councillor Bennett, to move as per recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett.
So Murray Arts is the regional arts development organisation in this area. So it encompasses 6 LGAs, and all those LGAs contribute financially to that organisation. So Murray Arts advocates for artists by providing them with creative opportunities to develop and share their arts practice, specifically through business and marketing advice, professional skills and development. And one thing that I did want to highlight here is Murray Arts' very strong contribution towards Aboriginal art. So we've got it listed here, but I'll just go through that. So they have increased Burraja Gallery social media engagement. They've created 4 kinder culture at-home videos. So this is First Nation-led workshops for preschools. They have partnered with Albury Wodonga Aboriginal Health Service to deliver some workshops for Koori youth. They've partnered with GHD Wodonga to commission work from local Aboriginal artists. So they've got a big, emphasis on working with Aboriginal people, and this is in line with our council plan, in line with our reconciliation plan. So I'm really happy to support this. As we've talked about COVID, the arts and creative industry was extremely hit by this. They were the first hit. They were the last to reopen. So I think it is really critical for council to continue this MOU. The local councils around us, I assume, will be doing a similar thing. And that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer. Reserve the right. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Watson first, then I'll come to you, Councillor Mildred.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. As I'm a very avid ABC listener, and I gather you're probably not an avid ABC listener, Mr Mayor, is that throughout the term of the MOU in the past, they've had segments on ABC radio which goes around our whole region. We hear about all the different programs that have been on in the past, and that will continue, I'm sure, into the future with ABC radio. So to me, it's a great thing for us to combine with these other groups for the arts in our region. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Mildred, as promised.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a question, actually. With the way the motion is worded, it says to have an annual CPI increase of 1.5. Does that mean 1.5 irrespective of whether the CPI is 8%, or is that going? How are we going to apply that?
Good question, Councillor Mildred. I'm guessing it's as spelt out at 1.5% regardless of CPI. Am I correct in reading that? Thanks, CEO.
So the way it's written, it's 1.5%. If councillors wanted to amend that and make it just CPI, that would be open to councillors to determine.
I'm going to take where I think you're going, Councillor Mildren, around removing CPI and just having an increase of 1.5% thereafter. Yeah. Yeah. So sorry, my movers were Councillor Bennett and seconder, and we'll put it in as 1.5% as the motion, just so we're all on the same page. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the CPI wording that was drawing the confusion. If CPI categorically was at a higher rate, and we've set it at 1.5%. So for technicality, we'll remove CPI from the motion. Councillors, anybody else? You didn't speak, so it was just a question, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Quilty.
A question from me, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I understand from the report, we currently have a 3-year memorandum of understanding with Murray Arts. Why are we extending it to 4, which will also carry it over this current council tenure?
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Director Hogg.
The 4 years was to provide some assurance in planning and also the funding cycles for the agency involved.
And sorry, just to clarify a little bit further, Director, that's external funding away from us, is that right? So other funding bodies?
It's so that this funding the level of funding over a 4-year period provides greater extent of assurance for their planning and also for their funding forecast for Murray Arts. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Councillor Simpson, I should check Councillor Hall and Councillor Mildren. Didn't want to speak for or against. Councillor Simpfendorf, you reserved your right. No. Councillor Bennett. Nothing in closing?
Just one other point, that as well as arts and creative industry, Murray Arts play a role in tourism as well. Again, another industry that has been decimated by COVID.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I therefore put the motion. Councillors, all those in favour? All opposed? Carried 6-1. To remove the CPI, the actual 3 letters out of that motion. Thank you. On to 8.12, the HotHouse Theatre update and MOU. Councillors, I'm going to suggest that maybe before you put the motion, you might suggest we take out the CPI out of the recommendation to avoid that lengthy conversation again. Is somebody happy to move the recommendation we have in front of us on page 46 with that removal of 3 letters? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Seconder? Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett.
So, HotHouse has a reputation as a nationally significant theatre company, and they are that because they are now Australia's only regionally based producing theatre company. So it's incredible that we have that right here in Wodonga. There is only one of them, and we happen to have it here in Wodonga. Pre-COVID, their figure, so looking at 2019, the HotHouse welcomed approximately 6,200 visitors through the Butter Factory Theatre. Wodonga audiences grew from 21% to 26% from 2018 to 2020. In 2019, these were some of their achievements. They supported 95 artists. They developed 17 independent theatre works, 2 public productions delivered to a collective audience of 728 people, 11 public showings. They supported the development of a new First Nations mixed mould choir. They also supported the re-establishment of the Black Border Theatre, and they also commissioned 3 new Australian plays. With the same point with Murray Arts playing a role in tourism, so does HotHouse. During the 2019-2020 season, HotHouse hosted patrons from over 100 external locations to Wodonga, so all around Victoria, New South Wales, ACT and Tasmania. The paper in front of us also talks about the National Arts Participation Survey, which has identified that 98% of Australians engage with the arts and 68% of those attended live theatre events, festivals, music, visual arts, dance and First Nations arts. Another point I think is important to note is that they have a commitment to ensuring that their work is accessible. So they offer low-cost, subsidised and free tickets to various community groups so they can participate in this sort of art. And I didn't realise that they run a technical traineeship program, and that traineeship program has a 100% success rate of graduates getting sustained employment in that particular industry. And HotHouse have a big focus on place-based stuff. So they honour, the history and what's happening here. So, for example, they've done pieces around the drought, around the Murray River, around mental health here. I know they did a really interesting one with like letters to the Border Mail. Yeah, I think that was it. And you could nearly, if you're in the audience, you could actually tell who they were talking about just because that's how well they had, how well they were acting. They did a piece on Bongilla, which was really interesting, and even the Development Corp. So as well, and they also employ local artists, local producers, local writers, set and costume designers, but they have, and why they're of such high calibre is, as well as all of that focus on local people and local issues, they work really closely with Melbourne Theatre Company and the Sydney Theatre Company. So, to have that high calibre, meaning that people here locally get access to, art that we would only normally be able to get in Melbourne and Sydney. And again, like with the Murray Arts, art and the creative industry has been decimated by COVID, and it is certainly important for us to play a role in supporting the creative industry.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Very close to time, I think. Maybe they're very close. Councillor Sinfandel for a seconder.
Yeah, just quickly, when I first read this and we had our briefing, I was hoping that the funding from the Australian Council that wasn't going ahead was a typo, but it's 240,000 that they've had to take into account. It's not going to be part of the funding that they would receive moving forward for their arts. So it was quite a shock to me to see that. But I guess a word that I hadn't heard much before 2020 and 2021 was how they're able to pivot through what they've had to do and then take things internationally, and reading that their online streaming went into Germany, Wales and the States. It's a credit to them. So I agree with the motion that we support them through everything they're doing in our community and putting us on the map regionally with what they do down there. It's a real credit to them. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfandorf. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm a very passionate supporter of the HotHouse Theatre, and also so is the Albury City Council supporters of HotHouse Theatre, but they also have a program which they've recently, in recent years, in residence. So actors and artists and whoever come and they stay in residence. And so it's a really, as much as doing production, it's a learning environment as well, particularly for our schools, all sorts of things. Councillor Bennett did mention all those things, which I won't repeat, but it's a great thing for our city. And as Councillor Bennett said, it's the last regional acting or theatre company in Australia, which is a real credit to us in this region.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Mildren.
Question, Mr. Mayor. I understand we have circa 50,000 allocated in this year's budget for this purpose. Whereabouts are we drawing the additional sum from that we're approving if we approve this motion? Where's that going to be drawn from? Where are we finding the money, in other words?
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Through the CEO to Director Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's a very modest budget variation and we can manage that through our cash reserves. So it'll just be an adjustment back to cash reserves.
Answer the question. And did you want to speak for or against any of the remaining councillors before I go to Councillor Bennett to close? Councillor Hall.
I'm actually in supporting the existing MOU. We've already budgeted 50,000 per annum for that. The report notes that HotHouse has been on had the same financial contribution with council since 2015. Many people, ratepayers, are feeling the crunch. Many have lost their jobs. or had their work hours reduced. They still have to pay their council rates and living costs, and it isn't an easy time for many people out there. This is why we as a council should be respectful of our council spending. I know that, you know, they say that they're doing it tough, but there's so many other people out there in the community that are too, who are ratepayers, and I think we need to be, you know, mindful of where we spend the extra money. I think 50,000 is a pretty generous amount of money. So I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Quilty?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors, for voicing your opinion for or against. I acknowledge that HotHouse Centre is a beautiful asset to our community. They do a lot of good work in the area. I would like to point out that we are looking at budget variation of 7.3 thousand. When we voted on Murray Arts update before, we didn't actually have much in the way of budget variation, and here we do. And there were two words said here. One was modest and the other one was generous. I'll go with generous. We already have budgeted for a reasonably generous contribution. Nothing is too small in this current environment. A lot of people doing it tough, it's true. And while I think we're really fortunate to have HotHouse, etc., I don't think we should try and creep our contributions any higher, because we simply can't afford that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Milton, you haven't spoken. You asked a question, so away you go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, HotHouse do some absolutely amazing things. They do some wonderful work, and we as council have supported them for a very, very long time, and I think rightly continue to support them. And we have budgeted this year to support them. I am also aware, some I've had peripheral involvement with, of several other theatre companies and groups in Albury Wodonga who are perhaps not as far advanced and haven't experienced the levels of support, shall I say, from this council or Albury City over the journey, and they are doing some very good work, often different types of very good work. They actually get out in the field and produce shows that generate income, that keep their organisations alive. But they too could equally benefit from dollars that come from council. I think where I'm coming from, if we're going to increase our spend in the arts, then I think we should be trying to spread it to some of the other organisations. I acknowledge Councillor Simpendorfer's comment about the loss of major funding, but that's extremely unfortunate as it is, but it's not something that we should be stepping into to pick up, and we shouldn't be creating precedents that suggest that's the sort of thing we're doing. And I realise $7,000 odd is a long way short of the 200 plus, but my view is I think we should be looking to support all of the other, or as many of the other theatre groups and arts organisations that we are so lucky to have in this city, or in Albury Wodonga more broadly. They come and go across the border, as we all do, and I just think maybe we should be looking at this in a bit more strategic way than trying to just deal with this one in a one-off exercise. And I think to that point of view, we've been, I believe, generous in our budget allocation already, and I think that should be the sum of it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. In closing, Councillor Bennett.
So a couple of us have spoken about this increase of $7,000. Now, this increase isn't because they missed out on that federal funding. This increase is to increase their ongoing commitment to First Nations community through the employment of an emerging First Nations arts leader, the Associate Producer, First Nations. The role supports the development of young First Nations artists grow First Nations audiences and present the stories of the community on the main stage for $7,000. You know, this is in line with our council plan, this is in line with our reconciliation plan. Yes, people have been doing it tough. If we're going to look at, you know, the First Nations community, they've also been doing it tough too. So that $7,000 is for a fantastic initiative. Also, we've spoken about other theatre companies, which are, you know, absolutely, they're great. This is the only professional theatre company in Albury-Wodonga. So they pay their staff, and that's how people in the creative industry actually earn a living. So I just wanted to make that differentiation between the theatre companies here locally.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I therefore put the motion. All those in favour? All those opposed? Carried 4-3. Thank you. On to item 8.13, the tender for the provision of library collections, furniture and equipment, and also associated requirements. Councillors, there's a recommendation on page 54 of your agenda. Would somebody like to move a motion? Thank you, Councillor Watson. As per the recommendation, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mildren, was it? That was the thank you. Councillor Watson.
Mr. Mayor, just as per the recommendation, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're lucky enough to have a quite wonderful new facility. If we were of a mind not to, shall we say, kit it out in the way that we probably should be kitting it out, then I think we'd be wasting all the money that we spent on building a new building. So my understanding from this is over a period of time designed to make sure the place functions and to make sure it has the appropriate kit and livery, shall we say, to make it a functional library. So, recommendation, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One additional point I would like to note about this tender. The contract is going to include a number of categories of materials in languages other than English, which is new, and I think it is great. We have a diverse community with many members for whom English is not their first language. We won't be naming names and pointing fingers right now. However, I also know there are a lot of parents who are struggling to preserve their language in their kids. And I think having these materials in the library will be a great asset and a great help. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. Councillors, now in closing. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hall.
Just a little bit to add. Yes, look, you know, we've got this fantastic new library, and it would be detrimental if we didn't allow for a library collection, new library collection, furniture, equipment, and associated requirements. This I see as a necessary spend. So when you construct a new infrastructure like the library, there will always be these associated costs that need to be budgeted for. So yes, I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Watson in closing.
Mr. Mayor, you might have thought I was a bit brief in my acceptance of the motion, but I did say some years ago, or when we did the contract for the library, to make sure we don't put old resources back into the building, and I've always been on that we build this fantastic asset and then we put older equipment back in. So, you know, I fully endorse what's going forward if it's successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. Item 8.14 is the tender for the bridge repair and strengthening works. The recommendation, I think it's across 2 pages. Yes, it is. Starts at page 59 across into page 60. Councillors, would somebody like to move? Thank you, Councillor Mildren, as per the recommendation. Thank you. A seconder, Councillor Hall. Thank you, Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. From what I understand of this is something that we really absolutely need to get sorted out and get sorted out relatively quickly for a whole range of reasons. Accessibility at this location is becoming important and important for a number of different things that serve to develop our city. So, being brief, that's why I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. I do recall the panicked phone call that you gave me the day the news came through. Councillor Hall.
With a very busy construction residential housing market, we definitely need this bridge to support that the new developments going ahead in our outer areas of Wodonga. So yes, if we didn't have this, I think we would grind to a halt. So I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillors? No. In closing, Councillor Mildren, you're happy for the put? Therefore, put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 8.15, Councillor Mildren, I have you down as a conflict of interest.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My business in the past did work for the developer of this site in relation to this estate. This is probably the last time I need to actually remove myself for these things, but given that I've done it for this one consistently, I'll stay out of the room as well. But in the future, I don't have an association, so the conflict is probably disappearing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. We can speak to that at a later date where appropriate. So 8.15, councils the amendment for C135 Riverside Estate. Recommendation on page 66 of your agenda. Is somebody prepared to move a motion? Councillor Simpfendorfer, as per the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Mr. Mayor, I think it's pretty well explained in the report and the summary of what's required there. Riverside Estates continued development, so I'll probably should take my mask off, that's probably better. As per the recommendation for the continued development at Riverside Estate.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett.
I'll just quickly read in the sustainability implications, we talk about the environmental and the climate change risks. So this particular amendment, the proposed zone boundary changes, so that will mean that council can suitably manage that area in the long term and mean that we can regenerate that natural vegetation within the adjoining environmental land. So that's a big win.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Watson.
Mr. Mayor, this has been a long process that's now come to a conclusion. So if successful tonight, it'll be a good thing for both the developer but for our city.
Thank you. And what's that, a raised hand, Councillor Hall? Yeah.
Oh, look, not much to add, but just the fact that it has been an ongoing item that's come back to council many times. So we've come to a final conclusion. These amendments have been, as I said, with council for some time now, and I'm told that the council staff and developers are both satisfied with the amended outcomes agreed to. So it's good to move forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. In closing, Councillor Simpfendorfer? No? I'll therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll get Councillor Mildren back into the room for item 9. Councillors, item 9.1 is the Workforce Plan 2021. The recommendation is that the Workforce Plan be received and noted on page 71. Have I got a mover? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Second to Councillor Bennett. Does anyone wish to speak against? Carried unanimously. Item 10, as always, pull me up if there's something we need to draw the attention to. So 10.1, the planning report for September on page 74. The 10.2, the building report for September. The 10.3, competitive services report for September. 10.4, the council plan quarterly report. 10.5, the record of councillor meetings. 10.6, the decisions register. Thank you, councillors. Item 11, notices of motion, of which there are none. Item 12, petitions, there are none. 13 is the common seal of council, of which there's none. Item 14, councillors, general business. Does anybody have some general business? Councillor Bennett, and then I'll come to Councillor Quilty.
So I just wanted to recognise a young person, Alana McEwen. So Vic Health have chosen 14 health champions around the state, and I was looking at their newsletter and saw Alana. So she's from Wodonga, so that's very cool that we've got representation at that state level. And she was, so she's got Down syndrome, and she was talking about the benefits of healthy eating for young people, and she gave some credit to Purple Chicken, which is this organisation in Albury. So it's a hospitality training venue as well as a cafe, and they work with young people with a disability. And so well done to Alana for, getting a prestigious title like that, and also Jen Tate, who's the operator of Purple Chicken, and they do catering. So, in post-COVID times when we have events, it would be good to utilise an organisation like that.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a call this afternoon from a very concerned member of the community who had troubles with a new requirement to show vaccination passports. I had to tell them that as a councillor, I could do absolutely nothing to help them. However, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the troubles of people who are making decisions and doing things they wish they didn't have to make and do. And I would like to say that unfortunately, future is uncertain. Us councillors, despite the absence of any legislation mandating us to show our vaccination certificates, we all made the choice to, willingly or begrudgingly to show our vaccination certificates so that we could represent our community here tonight in person. What I would like to say is that future is uncertain. We may have a lot of trouble ahead of us. We may have to make decisions we don't want to make. There is one thing that we 100% own, that 100% will help us get through that, is our human dignity. I call on everybody to preserve that despite all the fears and the uncertainties, and also to look after their loved ones. Thank you.
Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to take this opportunity to make a response to all those people that contacted me about the Chapel Street Anzac Parade Thomas Mitchell Drive roundabout, and give them the good news that Officer Schultz has told us that we're going to take some action to remediate some of the issues with the pavement. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. All over and out. I might just add in there, just echoing, I guess, a bit of sentiment from Councillor Quilty. I'm sure it's on behalf of all of us as a council as a whole that we do wish our community good health and hopefully as smooth the waters as possible through the coming weeks and months ahead. It's going to be very trying at multiple fronts. So please allow me to do so there. Item 15 is urgent business, of which there's none, councillors. Item 16, CEO, I understand 5 questions this evening. I'm sure that these could be extensive and long, perhaps, with responses, but please do your best to take us through them.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. And I just want to assure those people that sent those questions in that we will respond fully in writing, and that written response will go on our website so that others can see it as well. I'll try and be as quick as I can in reading these. The first question is from Karen Nelson, and it's in relation to which agencies has Council collaborated with to seek up-to-date statistics supporting the National Alcohol Strategy as part of due diligence to support representation of the public with regards to proposals submitted to approve planning to build Dan Murphy's in the central CBD shopping area. The measures of success of the National Alcohol Strategy state a range of data exists to measure reductions in alcohol harm and risks of alcohol-related harm. What are the results of the most up-to-date data relating to the Wodonga community? And has the pandemic affected the implementation of the strategy? Does Council, Development Victoria and local government MPs consider and agree that permitting a designated alcohol retailer to build in the centre of Wodonga could have a negative impact on the health and well-being of the community? And in answer, Wodonga is a key partner in Wodonga's local drug and alcohol team, I'll call that the LDAT, and works with a range of local agencies towards reducing alcohol and drug-related harm in Wodonga, including Wodonga Police, Albury Wodonga Health, Gateway Health, the Department of Justice, Headspace, Mind, and Mungab Aboriginal Corporation. The LDAT adopts a collaborative approach in the recognition of the complex drivers of alcohol and other drug-taking behaviour in Wodonga, as well as an identified need to coordinate local resources to maximise opportunities and achieve improved outcomes. The work of Wodonga's LDAT closely aligns with the National Alcohol Strategy and has endorsement from the Australian Drug Foundation, funded by the Australian Government. To date, the work of the group has focused on preventative approaches to address alcohol and other drug use in the community, including the development and implementation of community-wide campaigns and primary prevention programs. All efforts are informed by local data, including crime and hospitalisation statistics, the existing evidence base, and from on-the-ground insights of partners. Acknowledging the impact of alcohol-related harm on the community, Council is also committed to acting in its critical role in licensing and law enforcement to reduce alcohol-related harm. For example, Council enforces the ban of alcohol consumption in public places and insists on the responsible service of alcohol as a condition of building leases. In regards to the specific information asked in regards to the Police Commissioner, we certainly encourage you to address those directly with their office. The National Alcohol Strategy 2019 to 28 is a 10-year strategy and has an agenda of reducing harmful alcohol consumption by 10% over the life of the strategy. The first report against this progress is not due until the year 3 of the strategy, which is in 2022. But in regards to specific data for Wodonga, in 2018-19, the city had a rate of 32 incidents of alcohol-fueled family violence per 10,000 population, down almost 2 points from 2016 and 2017. However, we acknowledge that 53% of people in Wodonga are at risk of alcohol-related harm, compared to 42.5 in Victoria as an average, and that continued work is required around this important agenda. In regards to Development Victoria, land and any planning permit applications follow a statutory process governed by the Planning and Environmental Act. The National Alcohol Strategy is not specifically referred to in the planning scheme. However, in assessing an application for a packaged liquor outlet, the most relevant part of the planning scheme is clause 52.27, licensed premises, and the considerations set out there centre around the amenity impacts from licensed premises on surrounding areas, matters such as noise, light spill and antisocial behaviour. Issuing a liquor licence is independent of the planning permit. The Victorian Commission for Gambling and Liquor Regulation is the independent statutory authority that regulates the industry and issues liquor licences. Planning Practice Note 61, in dealing with cumulative impacts, talks about negative as well as positive cumulative impacts and provides guidelines that assist a permit applicant when considering responding to the potential cumulative impact of a proposal and supports the council when assessing that impact on licensed premises as part of the planning permit application. It's important to note that in this instance of Junction Place, this is a private application on land that's not owned by council, and like anyone, the developer is entitled to procedural fairness and confidentiality, which the process allows for until such time as the planning application is able to be made public via the notification processes laid out in the Act. This process, which is ongoing right now, then follows for open community feedback, which we receive and welcome, followed by a fully informed paper, which will go to our councillors for a decision. That will take all feedback and objections into account for a determination in due course. Question 2 is from Wendy Fisher. When does Council see that there will be more than one road entrance developed to the Kalara estate? And she goes on to say that she was told that Army and Council have set monies aside, but the developer is not willing to participate and discussions were continuing. In the 2020 January fires, the outbreak on Barranduda Hills, it was an absolute debacle to evacuate the whole estate with only one exit route. Council should not be allowing the developer to continue to release stages of the subdivision until they decide to seal alternate access roads. In an answer to Wendy, a requirement for the ongoing development of Riverside Estate is a provision of the second entry egress from the Murray and onto the Murray Valley Highway. This is the developer's responsibility and is dependent upon generated traffic volumes in and out of the estate. The original approved layout of the estate showed the second entry egress point entering at the proposed roundabout at the Murray Valley Highway and Whites Road intersection. In reassessing their options, the developers are currently in the process of investigating, designing and seeking consideration for an alternate access, which is approximately 200 metres east of the Whites Road intersection. This proposal is in the form of a T intersection with the Murray Valley Highway, entering at Cuthbert Street. In order for this to progress, the input and approval from Regional Roads Victoria is required and has been sought. Council has provided in principle support for this proposed location. As has repeatedly been advised, the provision of that second entry and egress point is the sole responsibility of the developer in consultation with Regional Roads Victoria. Council has on many occasions strongly advocated for this work to be undertaken. So further information should be requested from the developers of the Riverside Estate. Question 3 is from John Malkoff. We have a homeless and housing crisis in Australia. As a volunteer for Uniting, we have many homeless who present themselves to our organisation seeking assistance such as food, clothing, bedding and a hot shower. Some are couch surfers, some are staying with friends or sleeping in a car or camping on the riverbank. I asked the question to Council, please consider having a shower facility available to the homeless / travellers in Wodonga. Now, Council recognises the challenges faced by some community members in being able to access shower facilities. Council officers have been working with Aligned Leisure and Uniting on a project to establish a dry access pass to support vulnerable community members in need of public shower facilities. This initiative has the potential to facilitate access to amenities at 4 sites across Albury-Wodonga. The planning and structure of the project is established. However, due to the current COVID-19 restrictions, the implementation has been delayed as present restrictions do not allow for these amenities to be open to the public. And there are also current impacts on the staffing resources. That said, all parties remain committed to working together to progress this important project and are continuing to work through a plan for how to implement the dry access pass once the COVID-19 restrictions allow. Question 4 is from Alison Mitchell, and this was only received today. Thank you for your responses to my previous questions to Council. I note that in response to the response that the City of Wodonga has committed itself to the Victorian Energy Collaboration Project, the largest ever emissions reduction project undertaken by local government in Australia, and I applaud this initiative. However, the response also notes that this has effectively reduced Wodonga Council's emissions by 80% with effect from the 1st of July 21, well ahead of the IPCC report, which we quote, which states that we need to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030. Whilst being well ahead may be true for the City of Wodonga's Scope 2 emissions, what proportion of the total emission reductions does the VECO initiative represent? And if it is above the emissions reductions needed as indicated in the most recent IPCC report, what will the City of Wodonga do to reduce Scope 1 and Scope 3 emissions? So we'll take that question on notice. We will provide a written response within 5 days, and it will go onto our website, as I mentioned. And lastly, the last question received today as well, so we will respond in writing, is from Michelle Cowan. A planning permit application 97-2021 proposing significant changes to the Junction Place master plan was lodged with Council on the 14th of July. Why was this planning application not put on public exhibition when the changes are significant and of intense public interest? Development Victoria and the developers of Junction Place have held community information sessions during September and October. They've heard strong, sustained community opposition to the proposed changes to the master plan for Junction Place. Has there been any changes to the master plan planning permit application by the proponent that reflects the community concerns? So again, we received that today. We'll take it on notice and we'll certainly provide a response to Michelle over the next 5 days. Thank you.
Thanks, CEO. Councillors, item 17, recommendation on page 103 of the agenda that we close the meeting for confidential business. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Anyone wish to speak against? No, we'll close the meeting. Thank you. All right, so item 19, we're going to adopt the in-camera recommendations. Councillors, page 114. Those in, a mover, sorry. Councillor Simpfendorfer, a seconder. Councillor Bennett, anyone wish to speak against? No, motion carried. Councillors, council officers and those on the stream still, thank you very much for attending tonight, and we'll see you again next month.